Well, looking at the impact of economic growth on the private sector, Patrick Obath, chairman of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA, joins me now from our studios over in Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, Patrick. Well, while a recovery is still being battled out, we've come across reports saying that the SME sector in Kenya specifically has recorded high growth despite the tough conditions. Just how resilient has the sector been?
The SME sector in Kenya has been very resilient, mainly because the market they rely on is in fact the local market in Kenya. And the global economy did not really impact heavily on the markets in Kenya. So the SME sector has been growing much against expectations. Much
against expectations, to the extent that it's been cited that it's recording high growth. I mean, what's being considered high growth here, and how does this growth compare to the levels we saw pre-economic crisis?
I think if you look at it, it's not compared to the pre-economic crisis. You compare that with the current economic growth in the country. If you look at the GDP growth prior to the political crisis and economic crisis, it was at about 7%. But in 2008-9, we are only seeing about a 2% growth in the economy. The SME sector has continued the similar kind of growth of about 7% compared to the GDP of 2% in the country.
Are there specific sectors, Patrick, that are outperforming?
The sectors such as tourism, the horticultural sector, the agricultural sector, the manufacturing sector have all been hit by the global crisis, but compounded obviously by the post-election violence that we had. And recovery in those sectors is actually quite slow.
Well, what's interesting is, as we've heard in the news, is that banks aren't lending as strongly as they should be, largely on the back of high rates, but also an unwillingness at this stage of the game to take on risk. I mean, what challenge does this provide for SMEs and their financing their growth moving forward?
The SME sector is probably one of the least banked sectors in the country. The microfinance institutions, I don't think, are having the same problems as the mainstream banks in terms of being able to lend to the SME sector. So a lot of the banking industry here are looking at trying to put funds aside to invest in the SME sector based on the current growth that they have compared to the mainstream business.
Having said that, the broker that I was speaking to earlier had highlighted that government stimulus package hasn't been properly implemented as yet. How much of a reliance is there on that stimulus package to come through?
I don't think we can place a lot of reliance on the private sector on that stimulus package. It wasn't a fully coordinated one. It targeted only specific sectors of the economy, and yet we needed one that was stabilizing the overall economy in the country. We haven't seen typically what you'd have expected to see compared to what you see in the more developed countries.
Certainly also in the more developed countries, sustainability, once those stimulus packages are implemented, becomes a question after it's withdrawn. Let's take a look at SMEs and them becoming resourceful in their own right, possibly tapping into the markets as a way to access capital. We know that a lot of exuberance over at the NSE has led to this optimism about new listings this year. Do you see small businesses going down that route and making themselves more accessible? One, as a way to increase their profile, and two, to raise capital moving forward.
There are quite a few of the medium-sized industries and business concerns in Kenya that are considering listing on the stock market during the course of this year. There are some which were delisted in prior years due to underperformance, but which are now also ready to come to the stock market. But you're not going to see a rush of small and medium industries coming into the stock market yet, because the level of capitalization required is still quite high. And the capital markets have to really look at what they require in terms of membership of the stock exchange, in terms of maybe having 2 levels of requirements for being quoted on the stock exchange. And that, if they do that, will actually spur a lot more medium enterprises to enter into the stock market. Well,